Good evening, everybody. This is Glenn Greenwald to react to the first and only vice presidential debate between Senator J.D. Vance, the Republican of Ohio, and Governor Tim Walz, the Democrat of Minnesota. That concluded just a few minutes ago. It actually seemed like it went on forever. I thought it was going to be 90 minutes. For some reason, it was like 90 minutes plus another 14 or 13. But anyway, I did endure it. I got through it all. And I'm here to just share a few observations about what just happened. I don't think it will be particularly significant. As you may recall, when I did this after the last presidential debate, I did it both for the Biden-Trump one and then for the Trump-Harris one. After the Trump-Harris one, I suggested that it was my strong impression that if you conducted polls and asked people who, quote unquote, won the debate, people would say likely that it was Kamala Harris who won the debate, and it ended up that is exactly what polls showed by a fairly significant margin, but that I didn't think it was going to be particularly significant or consequential for the overall race, that she might get a couple of points of a sugar high boost, but that ultimately and pretty quickly it would return to the prior state. And that's pretty much what happened over the last couple of weeks. Polls have gotten progressively and noticeably better, not significantly better for Trump in key swing states. And I just don't think the presidential debate ended up mattering. Maybe it made people have a slightly higher level of confidence in Kamala Harris. But actually, if you look at polls, people continue to say that their main problem with her is that she just doesn't seem to stand for anything. She never says what she believes. And I think as well as she theatrically performed in the debate, in a lot of ways that only worsened the problem, beginning with the very first question, when they said, was the economy better 4 years ago or under your administration? And she started by saying, I'm the child of middle class parents, whatever. If you were to ask me the same question after this debate, who do I think polls will show won the debate? I would say probably J.D. Vance, in the sense that I just think he performed much better in terms of theatrics, in terms of calmness and confidence. He articulated his views way better. I think that his challenge, as he saw it, was that he was the subject of a tsunami of negative media coverage the minute he was selected. I think out of fear that the media had, that they knew he was quite a capable speaker and a likable politician. And so they worked so hard to turn him into this hateful, odious weirdo. And I think a big part of what he tried to do tonight was to dispel that by making it seem like actually he's extremely normal in his comportment, in his life. And I think he came off as anything but weird. And I also think, ironically, Tim Walz undercut in so many different ways the core strategy of the Democratic Party when running against Trump and Vance, which is to basically say that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are these bizarre radicals who are so far off the chart of American democracy that even if you agree with them, or even if you think the Trump economy was better, they're just dangerous. They're just weird. They're just unlike anything that you think are people who should be in office. And basically, Tim Walz's strategy, and I'm not really sure why. Maybe they were concerned that the attack on him was going to be that he was this far leftist with all these radical policies in Minnesota. That was not J.D. Vance's strategy at all. And I think Tim Walz went in with a strategy to counter what he thought was going to be the attack on him that wasn't the attack on him at all. And his strategy was going to be to talk about how he agreed with so much of what J.D. Vance was saying to try and make him seem like this bipartisan moderate. And when he kept doing that, when he had no vitriol, no sharp rhetoric, oftentimes emphasizing over and over the extent to which he agreed with J.D. Vance, who's supposed to be this candidate who we're all supposed to believe is really far outside of the mainstream and of the realm of acceptability. It just bolstered the impression that J.D. Vance is just like any other normal candidate, and that the Trump-Vance ticket is a standard ticket that you treat with collegiality and respect. So I thought everything Tim Walz did undercut the main strategy of the Democratic Party, made J.D. Vance seem more likable. Not just J.D. Vance succeeding in that, but Tim Walz also kind of helping that cause by constantly agreeing with him. There are moments, where Tim Walz spoke about how his 17-year-old son had witnessed a shooting, and in a very genuine way, I thought JD Vance, before even answering, said, "Oh, I didn't know that. Like, my condolences. That has to be terrible." Seemed like a very genuine moment. Of course, from a father of three, I can understand that. So, in any event, that to me seemed to be the theatrics. JD Vance was far more self-assured, far more articulate. And I have to say, I always thought this about JD Vance. Of all the actual choices that Donald Trump was reportedly considering, my personal belief was that his best bet by far was JD Vance, not only because he is the only one of those other candidates like Tim Scott or Marco Rubio or Doug Burgum who really does have an anti-establishment populist core to how he thinks about politics that would bolster that strength of Trump in a campaign that in a lot of ways has seen the abandonment by Trump of a lot of those themes, but also because I've watched him before in interviews. He's extremely calm. He's extremely effective. He can go on any show, the most unfair framing, and he handles it very well. He conducts himself very competently. He has a lot of confidence in his own ability. So I always thought he was going to be effective. And again, that's why I think there was such a need to turn him into this image of some kind of freak who, remember, they use this meme of having sex with his couch. This is what they tried to turn him into. And the JD Vance that appeared on that stage was the opposite of that. And Tim Walz did a very good job in helping him. I also think, just in terms, again, of who won the debate, I'll get to the question of whether that has any impact on anything. But I think the number one fraud that Kamala Harris has more or less been able to get away with, at least at the beginning part of her campaign, her unelected imposed campaign, was she's been able to pretend that she's this outsider into politics, that she represents this turning of the page of these two old white guys, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and that she's running against the status quo with a promise to engage in all these new politics. And one of the reasons it worked is because polls have shown over the last year and a half that overwhelmingly Americans just dislike the choice between Biden and Trump, probably because they're just sick of both. Trump has been around for 8 years now. His act probably is wearing a little bit thin with people. Biden has been in office for 50 years, 40 as a senator, 8 as a vice president, 4 as a president. So to have these two guys who just seem like they've been around forever, who are basically 80 years old, people just wanted something different. And she seemed like she was different. She looks different. She seems younger. She is younger than both of them, but she seems even younger. There's a vibrancy to her. And I think for a while, people are like, wow, at least there's something new. This is something fresh and different. And just for that reason alone, I think she got a lot of support. The problem is that she's not anything new or different. If you dislike Biden, if you dislike the last 4 years, like so many Americans do, if you think the economy is bad for the middle class or for the working class, if you think inflation is suffocating people, higher prices and housing, all of that, immigration, the point is that she has been part of that administration, a central, crucial part at the center of it. And JD Vance did an outstanding job, I think, of not just reminding people of that, but the language that he used and got Tim Walz to use, meaning Kamala Harris did this, Kamala Harris did that, the Kamala Harris administration. That, more than anything, undercut this attempt for Kamala Harris to make herself seem like she's some kind of outsider. And if anything, the far younger candidate of all of them, a whole generation younger than both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, 2 generations younger than Joe Biden and Donald Trump, is JD Vance. And he seems like that. He has young children. He has that working class story from his origin. And so just on every level, I think everything that he did worked. There were missteps from Tim Walz. I think one of the most awkward things I've ever seen in any kind of a debate beyond the time that Joe Biden went on the stage for 90 minutes and we all watched his brain melt was when, to their credit, and I thought the CBS moderators were pretty biased in their framing and in their behavior against JD Vance, but nowhere near the level of what those ABC moderators were like. But they did, to their credit, confront Tim Walz on just one of the many discrepancies and lies that he's been caught telling about his own life and his own career, which was his claim repeatedly that he was in China or in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square protests when he just simply wasn't. And they pressed him on that, and he didn't really answer, and they pressed him again. And then he finally had to admit, look, I'm a knucklehead. I misspoke. I misremembered. I wasn't there. And there was just very awkward silence. And I don't know. I think for Americans who are being told to judge the election on character, to have a moment where one of the key people on the ticket, the vice president's running mate for Kamala Harris, basically got caught and had to admit that he lied about a story that he's repeatedly told. And he did the same thing with his military service that didn't come up. I don't know. I think that moment is one that people are going to remember just because it was so awkward. It wasn't handled smoothly at all. There was like awkward silences and dead silences. Okay. Now, the question is any of this really going to matter? Is this just like another debate that's going to change nothing in terms of the dynamics of the race? If I had to say for sure, and I just don't know, just like I emphasized after the last debate with Kamala and Trump, I don't know how the American public is going to perceive that. My guess is they're going to think Kamala won, and they did. I don't purport to be this like whisperer of ordinary Americans who don't pay close attention to politics. I don't purport to be able to predict how they're going to perceive things. So I do think they're going to say that Vance won. I don't think they're going to think Tim Walz was awful, but I think they're going to say Vance won. The question is it going to make a difference? And the only possible reason that I think it might have made a difference, if it does, and I'm very open to the fact that it won't, because vice presidential debates generally don't, actually would be two reasons. Number one, the whole thing dispelled the main attack on J.D. Vance, that he's some kind of fascist, fanatical weirdo, in part because he didn't seem like that at all, because he's not, and in part because Tim Walz did such a weirdly effective job in making him seem so normal. Like every answer was like, I really agree with the JD. I want to just treating him like in a very collegial way, which is the exact opposite of how the Democrats have worked so hard to treat the Trump Vance ticket. And just seeing Tim Walz even not talk about JD Vance the way he's been doing on the campaign trail as some freakish weirdo, but as somebody who can engage in very civil, policy-oriented discourse and even do so in a better way than Tim Walz did. I think that might change the perception of JD Vance, which in turn could help the Trump Vance ticket, because I do think that's been weighing down Trump a little bit, that his vice presidential candidate, before he could define himself, was defined so quickly by the media in a negative way. The other part of that, though, is that, as I said, I think what JD Vance did more than anything else was continuously remind everybody in every single answer that when Kamala Harris says, oh, I'm going to do these great things, and I'm going to do these great things, and I'm going to change this, and I'm going to change that, that the foundational fraud of all of that is pretending that she hasn't been part of the government, when in fact she is a crucial part of the Biden administration that overwhelmingly Americans think has done a terrible job on the economy, has done a terrible job on immigration. And I think reminding people of that constantly, that she is in the government, and she's also now constantly trying to remind people of that. Even today with the Middle East crisis and the Iranian attack on Israel, she went online and she was like, President Biden and I were in the situation where we're monitoring things. So this image of her as some sort of outsider is being every day undermined and undercut. And I think that's a major reason why Trump has started to do progressively better in the polls. Like I said, I could have a media critique, not only about how the framing was all toward the liberal bubble in which these media figures live. That's something we know, it's to expect. But even that very first question, when Margaret Brennan purported to describe the situation in the Middle East, to describe Iran, to describe Israel, there were so many assertions in the question that were so dubious. And this is how the media functions. They don't realize that they are that subjective. They don't realize that they are that ideological, but they are in everything they do. And I think one of the most amazing moments, if you want to criticize the media, was there was a rule that CBS agreed to, which was that they weren't going to purport to be the fact checkers that David Moore and ABC tried to do, that led to all that controversy where they only fact checked Trump, even though Kamala told several lies. So there was a rule that they weren't going to do that. And yet Margaret Brennan seemed like she was so eager to be a participant in the debate. In fact, often getting the last word by sort of floating down from her mountaintop and adjudicating who was right and wrong. And there was that one time when she purported to fact check what J.D. Vance said about what's happening in Ohio went about with these visas, and he didn't let her because why would he? If she wants to make herself a participant in the debate, an advocate for the Democratic Party side, he has every right to engage her. And I think that once he did that, it kind of put them in check, and they really didn't go back to doing that anymore. So I've always found J.D. Vance impressive. I was very glad when Trump chose him. I have a lot of good insight into why and how that happened, who specifically near Trump convinced him to choose J.D. Vance, because there are a lot of more establishment, militaristic, corporatist Republicans trying to get influence on Trump who absolutely did not want J.D. Vance for exactly the reason that other people such as Donald Trump Jr. and Tucker Carlson and others were encouraging and urging Trump to choose J.D. Vance. So I thought it was a very good pick ideologically in terms of what Vance represents as opposed to other Republican senators. But I also really did believe that he would be the most effective advocate for Trump. The thing about Trump is he has charisma. There's no denying that. He just has a natural charisma. I mean, that's why he was on television. He was a TV star, and millions of people watched him. And people have been fascinated by Trump pretty much his whole adult life. I mean, I remember when I lived in New York in the early 1990s, throughout the 80s and 90s, Trump was this magnetic media figure. They couldn't stop talking about him. And it's been like that the whole time. He just draws people attention to himself. And that is a form of political charisma that you cannot teach and J.D. Vance doesn't have. Only a politician every generation has it. Obama had it. Bill Clinton had it in different ways. J.D. Vance definitely doesn't have it. Kamala Harris does not have that. Tim Walz does not have that. But the problem with Trump is so often he's incapable of defending his own view in a way that persuades people who don't already know what he's talking about. He kind of speaks in this like shorthand where he'll just raise an issue that if you watch Fox News all day, you know what he's talking about. But if you don't, you have no idea what he's talking about. And he doesn't really complete the thought. He's not very good at like being articulate in a way that conveys things. He's very good at connecting to people emotionally, but he doesn't explain things well at all. J.D. Vance is amazing at that. I mean, that's where he ran circles around Tim Walz, I think, today. Tim Walz is kind of nervous. I think that was not the Tim Walz that you've seen on the campaign trail where he's comfortable being folksy, being like humorous. There was not a moment of any of that. He was just very constrained and nervous. Whereas J.D. Vance was in his natural element, debating policy, taking on critiques and very calmly dispensing with them. So I've always thought that that's why J.D. Vance would compliment Trump so well, was because Trump needs somebody who kind of is very articulate to explain the things Trump tries to communicate but doesn't do very well in communicating. In any event, that's a lot of analysis for something that very well may have no impact. I knew the Biden-Trump debate was going to have gigantic impact because no one's ever seen anything like that before. That doesn't mean I was prescient. I mean, it was so obvious. The Kamala Trump debate, I didn't think was going to matter much. I thought maybe it would give people who doubted Kamala and didn't know much about her a little bit more confidence because of how she comported herself. But because it was just so unsubstantive, there was no meat to anything she was saying. It was just this like vague, generalized political show. I didn't think it was going to make that much of a difference, and I don't think it did. I'm almost more convinced that this might, despite the historical trend that vice presidential debates rarely matter. But because J.D. Vance was able to project such a positive image that was so radically at odds with what the media has sold people about who he is, while Tim Walz was at best just a mediocrity, like a barely noticeable mediocrity, I think it could change the perception of J.D. Vance and possibly undercut the main attack on Trump and Vance, which is that even if you agree with them more ideologically, even if you think the economy was better under Trump, these people are just so weird, so hateful, so alienating, so foreign that you don't want them part of your political lives. And Tim Walz did a very good job from the Republicans' perspective of helping J.D. Vance seem like he was anything but all those things. So that's pretty much it. I don't think it was very profound. It was a policy debate, but not a very satisfying one in the sense that they were both working hard to appear more congenial and in agreement and bipartisan than they probably are. But it seemed substantive. But I think generally these debates end up having an impact that's more stylistic than anything. And so who knows? Maybe it'll have no impact. I definitely don't think it will be harmful to Trump and Vance. I don't think there's any chance of that. My guess is that those kind of polls that CNN conducts in the next day or two, or even tonight, will be more favorable to Vance than they will to Tim Walz. And I guess we'll see the extent to which it matters. But I guess the one observation I will add just to close is you see how much the media is willing to just spout the most coordinated anti-Trump and anti-Republican propaganda, even though it has absolutely no basis to reality. Whatever you think of J.D. Vance, there's absolutely nothing weird about him. He's a very classical American story, growing up in an impoverished home, a broken home filled with addiction, and a single mom, and all of that. That's very real. And yet he was able to overcome that and go to Yale and join the military and fought in Iraq, and then came back and was able to succeed in high finance. That's a very normal American story. And he's married. He has 3 kids. By all appearances, it's a very beautiful, stable, nice family. There's nothing weird about him, and yet the media turned him into that because the media can create whatever narrative they want if they unite enough and are repetitive enough in doing it. And I think in a lot of ways, this kind of was just another way of subverting the credibility of the media, because nothing they've been saying about J.D. Vance corresponded to the reality of J.D. Vance as he appeared. So, all right, I think what we'll probably do is be a little more substantive in the discussion tomorrow, assuming there's not a massive outbreak in the Middle East again that will consume most of our attention. We can delve a little bit more into some of the policies and assertions politically and ideologically. But those are my immediate impressions, and ultimately that's what this is for. So super happy for you to watch. We are an hour ahead of East Coast time, so it's pretty late here. Yeah, so that's, I think, everything. I'll take a look at the comments as well, see what you guys think, and try and kind of interact with those as well if we do something tomorrow. And I appreciate you watching, appreciate you taking the time and listening to my view of this debate. Have a great evening, everybody.
Hi, Glenn. Victor jumping in here just to remind people that we'll have a show tomorrow, and we have some content from the Spin Room. Michael Tracy was there, recorded some interviews. So people should keep an eye on this space shortly, and we'll have more stuff coming.
All right, there's Victor off camera making a good point, which is that we did send Michael Tracy to the debate, hoping that he would be able to accost Tammy Duckworth again and remind her one more time that she had her legs blown off in the Iraq War because of Dick Cheney. But originally, the idea was he wasn't going to be able to have a camera person there because we couldn't get a credential for someone to film him. So he was going to do audio interviews, and we were hoping he was going to write an article, which he still may do for locals. But given that I think he was able to conduct video interviews, we'll probably have some of those tomorrow, and then put the ones that we don't get to exclusively on locals. If nothing else, Michael's interviews are always idiosyncratic and unique and entertaining. So we'll look forward to those as well. All right. Thank you, Victor, for that reminder. And good night, everybody. We will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern on The Rumble Show. The clip you just watched is from the live after show we do on Locals, exclusively for our local subscribers. The live after show airs every Tuesday and Thursday nights immediately following our live system update show on Rumble, which is freely available to everyone. To join our Locals community, simply click the join button under each video on our Rumble page or at the link below. That not only entitles you to exclusive access to our after show, where we take your questions, respond to your critiques and feedback, and hear suggestions for issues we should cover and people we should interview, but also to the transcripts for each show that we produce, as well as the exclusive written content we publish there. Enjoy.